Welcome back, or welcome to the Level One Coach Podcast. Drew and Mikael with you. I'm just gonna kick it right over to my partner in crime with some thoughts, and then we're gonna roll from there.
Thank you. So we were going back and forth on like different this is last couple of days, but also maybe a month or so ago, different ways to look at things as far as like player potential or even team potential and how I guess certain players seem to like take off and do really well. And in my mind, I had been thinking of like pro or college where like I remember being this is backing it way up to like when I was I don't know 12 or 13 years old, and I would look at like hockey DB back in the day and it'd be like a guy in the OHL. I remember asking my dad like how come this guy his first year in the OHL he has like 9 points, and then his second year in the OHL he has like 70, and then his third year, if he plays a third year, he has like 140. Like where how did he just go, how did he get so much better from year one to year three? And I think a lot of times, like the narrative becomes like how hard that player worked and how much he did and how much training or how much time he spent training and adjusting to that level. And those things are all true. And generally, a player going from if you stick with this example, 9 to 140 points over the course of 3 years, like he probably did work decently hard off the ice and on the ice in that time to achieve that. And certainly he got adjusted to the level in the league because he's there 3 years in a row. But I also think like for as many players that accomplish that, there's ones that don't, that maybe were the same level of talent or same potential when they were that 9 point player, but by the third year they've stagnated or they've barely improved. And this is where our conversation sort of went of like, I think it takes a coach. And sometimes like if you're talking about Connor McDavid or you're talking about Jerome McGinley or just like somebody, who was like generational in terms of their ability, like I don't want to say any, but almost any coach is going to believe in them. But then there's other guys like Braden Point or I don't know who else, but other guys like that like they weren't a guaranteed first rounder generational talent, and they went from being undrafted and having good years in juniors or good years in pro, but then like took off to the level of an all-star or a superstar. And the idea that we came to, or at least I came to, is like I think it takes a coach or a combination of coaches to like unlock that player and believe that like, hey, like we've always given the keys to Nikita Kucherov. Like, what if we also gave the keys to Braden Point? Like, could he do it for us? And um, there's plenty of other examples of guys like that that have not been the first, second overall picks that end up achieving just as much, if not more. I mean, Datsuk and Zetterberg come to mind for me too. So I think you have a really good example in a different sport, but of a player talking about essentially exactly this. And it wasn't a planned thing, just kind of came up that after we had talked about the stuff I'm mentioning, you came across your example.
Yeah. Obviously, I've been super big into like the power versus force stuff recently, and we talked about a couple podcasts ago about like the observation that originally came from me as a player in juniors that players have two ceilings. And for me, I was an average, below average high school hockey player. No prospect of really playing juniors. Got in at the worst tier three team available, but then played for what was my introduction to power in a coach named Todd. And what I realized, and sure, it's the same thing, kind of like you were saying. Was I training? Yeah. Like, did I just stop training and all of a sudden get better just playing for this guy? No. But like, there's really, I do think we overhype like he got a ton better in the off season in terms of like physical strength, speed, whatever. And there are gains to be made there. I'm not ignorant to that. I come from strength and conditioning, but I think a lot of the jumps are in the mind, and it's even more it's one thing to look at a junior player like your example over 3 years where they're like where they actually are developing physically and they're growing, but it's another thing to look at a guy like Tua, who's the quarterback of the Dolphins, and he was on a podcast that I caught, and it's like one of those barbershop style ones where they expect you to be real and they're going to be real. So they asked kind of the differences between his first coach with the Dolphins when he came in as a rookie and he had a chance to play for him for a couple of years. And then Mike McDaniel obviously took over last year, and this will be his second year um, playing under Mike McDaniel. And it was the classic power versus force answer where Tua was like, as a rookie, I was told that I didn't deserve to be here, that I sucked, that my arm wasn't good enough. I was hearing all the things from him that like the draft experts were parroting. Um, didn't have a great arm, weird, funky mechanics, throws, you know, not as pretty as Tom Brady or Peyton Manning, guys like that. And he's like, that affects you, especially when you start to hear it over and over and over and over and over again. And I talk about like the death by 1,000 cuts thing that happened with Barry Sanders, and it's the same thing. It's kind of a coach's version of how propaganda starts, and propaganda gets believed just because it gets repeated a ton. And Tua's like, I fell for it. Like I kept hearing that I wasn't good enough, that I didn't deserve this, that I shouldn't be a starter in the league, that I was overhyped by my own head coach, for God's sake. And he's like, playing for Mike McDaniel was just a complete 180. And at first, he didn't believe the things that Mike was saying to him because he was like, you're closer than you think you are. It's kind of like that. I think everyone's seen that like Steve Kerr and Steph Curry bit where like he sits down with Steph in the middle of a game when he's having a tough game and he's like, you might feel that you're having a tough game right now, but analytically, like you're helping the team out and this is how. And he like breaks that down really quick. And Mike just showed him that like he was closer to greatness than he thought he was. He was closer to greatness than his other coach thought he was. And again, by repeating a different message that was more constructive, more positive, someone that he didn't change his throwing mechanics, he didn't change his footwork. And sure, some of that's probably changed a little bit. But for the most part, if you watch Tua throw at Alabama and you watch him throw now, same guy. So why are his completions going up? Why are his stats going up? Why is he now considered one of the top 10 in the league? And it's that two ceiling thing, I think, that we talked about, where the force coach limits you, puts you in a fear mindset, and the power coach completely unlocks you and lets you play to your full potential. I will kick that back to you.
So I'll build off one of those pieces because this reminds me, and I didn't know that Steph Curry example, but a couple years ago, we had a player who started the year very similar to how you're describing like this game for Steph Curry, where like I guess by his standards it wasn't very good, but by like the team standards, like we were, I don't know at that point what we were, but we were probably like 5-1 or 4-0. Like we had started off well, and he was contributing. He played every game, and he was contributing to that. And like, yeah, he definitely hadn't produced to the level that maybe he would have liked to, and probably to what he had expected for himself. But he still had like a couple points, let's say, and he was playing, 18, 19 minutes a night as a forward. And I remember like we had a conversation. It didn't ever come to, and now I'm thinking back, like we should have had this conversation with him as a player. But as coaches, we were discussing it, and like you could just tell he was kind of like frustrated. And the thing I remember we were saying as coaches is like he's not he's definitely not at the top of our team right now in production. And given like ice time to production, he's probably relatively low on that spectrum. yet he's still in the lineup every game and his line hasn't changed. He's not being bumped down. He's not taken off the power play unit. Like it should actually be like a vote of confidence. So like I know it's not happening today or it hasn't happened yet, but it's gonna come. You are gonna produce and we believe in you. And it doesn't mean that I don't think that like because you haven't yet, you won't all year, or because you haven't had that success that you want to, like you're no longer helping the team. And I think a lot of times for players, like you start thinking like, well, if like this example, we're 4 or 5 games in, I'm playing power play, I'm playing top six, like I should be around a point a game right now. I'm an upperclassman, whatever. And like if you're let's say you have 2 points so far in the first 5, 6 games, like if you're still in the lineup, you're not being taken off of the unit you're on, or you're not being moved down a line, like the coaches probably believe in you and probably think like you're an integral part of our team and you're going to be a reason why we do or don't have success. So one, don't put as much pressure on yourself at that point. But two, recognize like maybe I'm helping the team in other ways, and maybe I'm finding other ways to be valuable outside of just points. Um, so that's one thing that comes to mind for me. And then the other thing I'll throw back a question to you is like if you had to if you had to say what is more important, is it like with your personal example, the off ice work that you did, or having a coach who's willing to believe in you? With Tua, is it the progression he made over the course of 3, 4, 5 years, or is it the addition of a new coach that believes in him? And I'll also say it doesn't have to be either or, it could be combination.
Yeah, um I think it's as you're developing physically and you haven't reached, I mean, when you reach the pro game, like there's still room, especially if you don't play junior. So like football's a little different. You enter the league maybe a little bit younger, but I even still think that like for some reason the quarterbacks still end up coming into the league older. But anyway, like I think as a 25-year-old rookie in the NHL, for example, because you've played juniors and you've played college if you've went that path. Um, like the closer you are to physical maturity, the unlock is going to be mental. And then the further away from complete physical maturity, it's going to be a combination of both. But like the more that players are starting to be more forthcoming with this information, and just when I go back to what unlocked me, like sure it was continuing to train and just not completely, like you can't split test it perfectly. Like, you can't just stop training, meet a power coach like Todd, and then see what happens. Like you still have to keep squatting and keep sprinting and keep doing whatever you need to do. So like there's not a perfect way, but I think what makes sense for me is like Tua was a grown man and a grown man's body when the flip or when the switch flipped when he met Mike McDaniel. And I think an 18-year-old, um, I'm repeating myself. So I think you got it. So,
So you're saying that as the closer you get to being, let's say, to his age now,
mhm.
and being past the point of like physically maturing, at that point it becomes more about the coach. I just want to make sure I'm
Yeah, I think the last unlock once you've reached physical maturity is the mental game. So meeting or playing for a coach that is more power based, love, compassion, forgiveness, positive, what have you. Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. I think that's true probably. Or it makes sense to me as far as like once you've gotten older and there's less for you to, I guess, learn in terms of like how your physical, not less for you to learn, there's less for you to develop, I guess, with your own body and your own um like physical skill set, that
Mhm.
it becomes more about like your mind and what you can do. I also think that's an area where this is a little bit different, but I think when you get into professional sports for sure, every like the bare minimum that every guy brings is an elite physical body or an elite physical skill set. So now like the difference between just being able to run a million miles an hour with a football in your hand is being able to do that while also, if you're a running back, I'm talking, or whatever. But being able, I'll just stick with hockey because I can't speak on other sports very well. If everyone, not everyone, but a lot of guys in the NHL, they can skate super fast and their speed is great. But how many guys can skate extremely fast with the puck and make plays? That narrows it down from guys that are, let's say, every game NHL players, but are never going to be all-stars, never going to be centerpieces of their team, to Connor McDavid or Leon Draisaitl or someone who can make plays at such an elite level that it's not just about their physical skill set. So getting to what you're saying of like, as you get older and as you develop, and that like sort of physical part comes closer to an end or closer to reaching a middle point with everyone, the mind becomes more important in what you're able to do. I had thought of it before you spoke as like, as a player, if you have all those physical, um like the training and all that stuff, if all that's locked in place and you've done a great job of it, if you play for a coach that doesn't believe in you, it doesn't matter. And so I kind of almost feel like the coaching, it's not the coaching, it's the belief from your coach that you really need, because I think really good, talented athletes are a dime a dozen, and they're not actually, I understand, they're not truly a dime a dozen, but you can find them at every level, across college, professional, high school, whatever. It's coaches that believe in that individual guy for whatever reason that allows this guy to be, superstar, all-star, all conference, all state, all league. Like, I think there's a level of that, that again, like, it sounds like I'm contradicting myself, but I guess I'm saying like, yes, you need to have that physical ability, and sometimes that is all you need. If you're playing at a level that is maybe not as high as other kids your age or other players your age, you could be all league, all conference, whatever, just on your physical ability alone. But as you climb that period pyramid and you get closer and closer to the top, all those physical things matter less because everyone has them. And now like the coach is what allows you, the coach believing in you is what allows you to go to that next level. And so what the reason I say all of this is because like I couldn't have less of a dog in the fight in the NFL. I've never had a team and probably never will. But hearing that, like, it makes me want to root for Tua just for the sake of like, can this guy go from being a player that everyone had something to say about, like you said, the way he throws, the way he does whatever, to now like it just takes one coach to believe in him, and can he become, maybe he's never going to be a, 7 Super Bowl ring guy like the greatest of all times have been or have been close to, but maybe he wins a Super Bowl or two, or maybe he becomes a Pro Bowl player that he hasn't been in the past. So yeah, that's kind of my take on it.
Yeah. The thought that comes to my head is like make it personal for you. And like the thought experiment I would challenge anyone listening to do is, who is the Tua on your team, and who is like what, like PJ Fleck refers to or referred to when he took over the Minnesota job as a sleeping giant, which means like the place has funding, the place has name recognition, the place has all the tools to be great. They're just not for whatever reason, and they need what he thought, hopefully a PJ Fleck. They needed him to unlock them. And he's done a pretty good job there. But like, to go back to the individual example, like who on your roster is a sleeping giant? And we talked about like what I think the best scouts do with like a Josh Hosang type is like go find kids that have played for force coaches their whole life and introduce them to power. And like, you want to find a diamond in the rough or the talent that whispers, like, that's one way to do it. So like with um I forget what I was gonna say. Do you have thoughts on that? I'm gonna try and recall that.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that I think is, well, I guess I don't really think this. I'm fairly confident I can say I know that it's really hard to tell who those players are without doing a ton of like background and investigating into them. Like you might not be able to watch a player at any sport at any level and know that like he just needs to believe in himself more. And this gets into like what I find to be a really interesting like dichotomy or comparison is like, do you take a player similar to Josh Hosang, who has played extremely high level hockey since he was 12 years old in the GTHL and blah blah blah. And then and now he's ready to play in the NHL, or he's being considered to be drafted. And then take a player who is same age as him, but let's say grew up in like Wyoming and never really played for, I mean, definitely never played in the GTHL and maybe never played at like these top level tournaments and showcases and whatnot when he was 12, 13, 14, and he's just coming onto the scene now in the last few years. Like I think a lot of times we want to look at Hosang and be like he's going to be better because he's had all this like kind of coaching and exposure at such a young age, and not Hosting specifically, but a guy like that. We want to say he'll be the better prospect. But I think one thing to think about with those guys is like have they been told some of the things you're saying of like you're not as good as McDavid, you're not as good as whatever guy in your age group. So you've always known you're good by virtue of being at this level and producing and playing, but you've never believed in yourself to be like the number one guy, the guy that everyone wants on their team versus this other example of a kid out in Wyoming who doesn't really know any better and he's just played and always been a top player or one of the best players on his team. And he's never really like, there's never been a narrative about him, so he doesn't have anything to believe or not believe. And I think sometimes those guys that come from that like less traditional background, they get there's a lot more scrutiny involved in like picking them or selecting them or whatever, because it's like could he possibly be as good without having played at these high levels at a young age? But a lot of times I think not a lot of times, but I think sometimes those guys have a lot of self-belief because they just don't know any better. They're not told that they're not good enough, or they're not comparing themselves to other guys that have had extensive OHL or D1 or NHL careers. They're just like, yeah, I'm just a kid from Wyoming trying to play hockey at the next level. So that's something that I think of too, as far as like trying to find, like you're saying, a guy who is fits that narrative or fits that description of like talent that whispers. Like sometimes that requires, some bravery or courage and going outside the box and uh and finding players or people that haven't had that traditional background of being exposed to these super high levels their whole life.
Yeah, the example that comes to mind right away is I'm sure they're still doing it. I've just followed it less closely, but when I was studying the steel pretty intensively, like the Ryan Hardy era steel, and I'm sure he wasn't there. There's a big staff there, so like I'm gonna say him, but credit to everyone involved. But like they came up against Fargo in the Clark Cup, and they're built completely differently from height, weight, that whole um paradigm and perspective. So like Fargo's the big bruiser team, and Chicago's a bunch of like 5'5", 5'6", 5'7", like undervalued in their youth, kicked aside a little bit, have some scar tissue to them because they've been through adversity. Um, just from like a height standpoint and how much that it's going away, but a lot of people still think it matters. And the first year they lost in the Clark Cup finals to a big bruiser playoff built team. And then the second year of that era, they win against a big bruiser playoff built team. So like you make it to the one game both years in a row and you're built completely antithetical to what like the current narrative is, that you have to be playoff built and physical and finish all your hits and that sort of thing that we're like currently enamored with. And I think it is going away a little bit, but that's the like example that pops into my head right away.
Yeah, it's like I feel like we always bring it back to this, but contrarian and right. Like,
Mhm.
so if you're gonna do something different, like the Steel had tried to do, then you've got to be convicted that that's the thing, that's the hill to die on. That's the way to go about it, and then you got to be right. Um, and obviously, like with the success they've had in the past and stuff, I'd say they did a good job of that. But yeah, I think that's sort of like that's one way of doing things that maybe is a little different in terms of looking at, okay, how can we if we're not going to necessarily do things the way everyone else does, um, what is a competitive edge we can find? What is a difference that we can try to make in how we do things? And sometimes these aren't like maybe they are, but I don't think they're always like brainchilds of a group of coaches sitting there being like, hey, like we work for the Steel and we need to be different to win. Like it could be as simple as with juniors or college, like we don't have the facilities or we don't have the resources, or we do have the facilities, we do have the resources. Um, we do or don't have the location. Like there, some of these are born from necessity, I guess is what I'm saying. And one of the coaches I worked for had this, I guess it's probably not his saying, but a saying that he would use in regards to our team. And he would always say innovation comes from necessity. So if we're going to look at being different, it's not necessarily because we just want to be different. Like we need to be. And our like that was something that he had leaned into a lot over his time at that place. So it's kind of this, I guess that's a much more succinct way of putting it, that innovation comes from necessity. And it's not like coaches always sit there and are just like, we got to be different for the sake of being different. Like we need to be different in order to compete. And how can we innovate? How can we find a way to be different and then um, be competitive at the same time?
Yeah, 100% agree with that. I did remember my brain fart, so I'll throw this at you and we'll go slightly. It just comes back to what we were talking about, the Tua stuff, and I'll try and transition with what we were just talking about to make it more smooth. So here we go. So like the thing with Tua and like the thing with I'll start with the Steel because we were just talking about them. Like to get the most out of an undersized, has a little bit of scar tissue, maybe weren't the best of the best youth players, maybe were overlooked because of their lack of size, whatever. You have to then have a coaching staff that believes in them. And if you have like coaches that I've played for in the past that were like, all my defensemen have to be 6'3" and all my forwards have to be close to that. And if you're not, you're literally nobody, then like that message is going to be, as a coach, you're going to be a rate limiter of the player's potential. And like as a coach, you don't want to be you don't want to be the reason. You want the reason to be they skipped workouts this off season. You don't want the reason to be because you're a force coach and you're just feeding them a lack of belief in them because you're not aligned with whether it's to a skill set or his arm or whatever, or it's you have a team full of 5, 6 guys that you don't believe in. And like my coaching mentor would always say, you're only as good as your coach thinks you are. And like that is, I've lived that completely because I've went from underperforming in high school, underperforming my first year of junior after I left that guy, having a really good second year, not getting physically that much stronger. And then my third year playing for him again and just being completely unlocked. And then I've again gone back down. You're only as good as your coach thinks you are. My second college coach thought I was the worst player in the world. And that ended up being a prophecy that was fulfilled, and just gutted me mentally, spiritually, emotionally. And I was a shell of who I was when I graduated college as a player, um, because of that kind of repeated message that Tua was getting with his first coach. I'll throw that to you.
Yeah, I think it's absolutely true. Like, I mean, there are players or scenarios where you can prove that coach wrong, and you can like by virtue of opportunity or luck, or a combination of those, you can like prove him wrong that you're better than he thinks you are. And that happens for sure. Like, I mean, I can think of players that I played with or that have coached that have done that. Um, but I think in a lot of ways, what you're saying is like, if you are going to, it's why like as a coaching staff, you have to be aligned and all genuinely believe that whatever it is that you're going to try to accomplish or however you want your players to play, like everyone's on board with that. Because to use your earlier example, like if you only believe that your team can be successful with big defensemen who are 6 foot or above, then the moment there's a 5'9" defenseman who's maybe really good and has a ton of potential to be good at your level, the moment he comes across your door, he's traded to your team or you have the opportunity to take him, you're going to be like, nope. And then that kid could go to another team that you play or another team in your league, and now he's excellent. So, but I guess the point is like if you bring him to your team and you break that rule of having guys only 6 foot or above, and you've got one coach who just doesn't believe guys can be successful that are below 6 feet, like this player is going to have a really hard time finding success and being given a true opportunity if one coach is already closed off. And it doesn't even need to be the coach that is quote like the D coach. It could be anyone. If you have three coaches or two coaches, it only takes one guy to be like, he can't do it. I don't think he can do it because of his size. Before now, everyone's kind of seeing the negatives of this player. They're not really focusing on the things he does well. And before you know it, this player's got no confidence, doesn't believe in himself, and probably is not going to be a successful contributing member of your team. So I think that's like it is definitely true, and I agree with you that the coaches um, have to believe in whatever it is they're putting forward as far as like this is the type of player we want, and also like this player can do it. I think that's very hard to fake. Like if you're I don't like this Mike McDaniel and Tua example. It's like I don't think McDaniel can go to Tua and just be like, I believe in you. You can do it if he doesn't genuinely believe that he can do it. Like that's you might be able to get away with that for a day, a week, but like man, over time, you can't fake a belief in a player. It's just it's gonna come out that this is not true. And really, it's not gonna come out because the player is gonna be like, I'm a genie and I can tell that you're lying. You're gonna go tell a different guy who you genuinely believe in, I believe in you, and other players on the team or Tua himself is gonna see that and gonna be like, that looks different than what he says to
Mm-hmm.
me. If and it almost feels different. And the amount of attention he's giving him and the amount of work he's willing to spend with him versus me, like he's not saying he doesn't believe in me. He's saying he believes in me, but he's showing he believes in this guy more. Um, so like that genuine part of it, like you can't fake that. I don't care how hard you try. I don't care how potentially sociopathic you could be. You can't fake the genuine belief in one of the guys or players in your team. So yes, I think to answer your question, like for sure, you need to genuinely believe in the player in order to get that out of them. And then I think you need to be aligned as a group, staff, whatever you want to call it, that this is a player that can do it for us. This is a style of play we want to have, and then work towards achieving that for that player and for your team. If it only takes one person to be against it, and before you know it, like the whole thing's coming unraveled because you're just not aligned.
Yeah, I think one thing that we as like a collective are, I think, starting to come to light on, but still across the board aren't doing a very good job is like, I think there's a I know that there's a perception from what I've observed that like I start to think back on like my playing career and where some of the messaging changed and where it was just like the force coach was almost like when you get to high school and the coach says, I'm done talking to your parents about playing time, about this, you're adults now. Like whenever that word and phrase starts coming, like brace yourself because like you might be running into a force coach and just observe how your game either takes a shit or hopefully you can ride it out and just play in spite of him. But I think like high school is one of those like moments where we I again I come from strength and conditioning and we talk about like training age um with athletes. So like there could be an 18-year-old that like his dad was former military and the kid's been doing push-ups and air squats since he was 9. So like although he's 18, we talk about training age, so like from 9 to 18. So he's had 9 years of training and he's going to be in like a different spot to start with than a kid that like started lifting weights at 16 because he had to in gym class and he's talented enough to make the hockey team, but like his training age is only if he's 18 and he's been training weight training since he was 16, his training age is 2. So you have a 2-year-old and you have a 9-year-old in the weight room and they're the same age and they're both 18 actual years old. And I think about this all the time on the mental side. So like you get these kids in front of you as the high school coach that's going to lay down the law and say, you're adults now. Some of those kids have had good parents, good coaches, a loving environment, have gone through just normal childhood adversity and have some scar tissue and have been positively affected by that. And they have a higher mental training age. And then you have kids that are the same age in that room that were, I'll throw the word coddled just because everyone will know what it means. That were coddled, that are more entitled, that maybe come from a more affluent background that didn't have parents that were aware of that. And that kid has a different mental training age than the kid that I first outlined. So like you can't then the force coach then treats them all the same, right? We've heard the speech that I just gave or some version of that. And then they go to college and it gets even stricter. Um, and like they start charting down this path without a map, most of them, just because we're ignorant to their lack of mental training age. We just see them as 20-year-olds and we're like, you can handle this, you're an adult. I'm going to start going up one side of you and down the other every time you make a mistake because you're an adult and you can handle it. And that's not ever good enough. It never should have been good enough. It's not good enough. It makes people turn into the first 3-year Tua instead of the last 2-year Tua. And I think part of it's done in ignorance. So to the 17 people listening, I'm going to bring some light and take you out of that ignorance. People have different mental training ages, but I think it's just broad brushstrokes ignorance, or it's just like there are bad people coaching. We've talked about that, but I'll kick that to you before I just go completely out of left field.
I've never heard of the training age before
Mhm.
in terms of like strength and conditioning or physical training, but I absolutely love that because I would attribute almost everything you just said probably to ignorance. And I'd throw myself right in there with being part of the ignorant group because I've always thought of it like I just gave an example with like GTHL in Wyoming. And here I am, like all you need to do is take their training age. So at what point did this player start playing high level hockey? GTHL kid, 9 years old. Wyoming kid, 16. Okay, they're both 18. Who's got more high level hockey experience? One's got two, one's got nine. So like it's pretty, you can do the same exact thing, like you just said, with off the ice or with the mental training age and like the maturity that you get from, I'd even throw in to your example, like you've got the quote coddled kid, the quote normal kid, and then you could have a kid who comes from a really tough background who was forced to grow up at a super young age. And so he's 20, but he's been an adult since he was 10 and he's had to make adult decisions and fend for himself. So maybe he can handle, maybe he can't, but maybe he can handle more of that like adult hands off, like figure it out on your own type of approach because he's been forced to do that from a young age. So um I think what's interesting is, and this would be like a long-term study that somebody else who has more time and interest in it can run. But like I think back to like when I was younger, so say 15 to 18, roughly, still in high school, not juniors or college. I think a lot of those guys that I knew that were in terms of your physical training, um, their training age was older at that time. They burned out by the time we were all like junior college aged players. And a lot of the players that ended up continuing on when we were 15, 16, 17, we were like our training age was like two. Like we were like I consider myself in that group just because like I don't think I actually started like working out off the ice and like caring about that until I was like 18 or maybe even 19. Like certainly not in high school. I was just like I was dumb. I was like, oh man, like I'm good players are good players because they're good on the ice. Like the gym doesn't matter. And I was like a chubby, like prepubescent, just like didn't even think about the fact that maybe if I cared a little bit more and ate a little healthier, like I'd be a better athlete. So like my training age when I'm playing U18 was one. I was starting out, I was learning how to crawl. I remember like not knowing how to do a hang clean. And there were other guys on our team that were putting up like 145, 155, and I could barely do 10 pounds on each side of the bar. And not all those guys, but I guess my point is like I think then some guys that start really young end up burning out, and guys that are younger when maybe they shouldn't be, end up being interested and like eager to learn throughout their time. So you could take the same approach. And I think we all talk about it, but we still put our kids in 17 different sports and spend millions of dollars traveling all over the country or the world when they're 10 years old. But like, this is why, that's a different rabbit hole for me, but this is why kids should play different sports. They should only be playing one sport if they just genuinely love it to the point that they don't want to play anything else. And if that's your kid, have at it. I think that's completely fine because that's driven by the kid, obviously. But try different sports. Don't worry about the level. The kids that end up specializing so young, their training age by the time they're 18, when it truly, quote, matters, is already 8 to 10 years old. And the other kids who are having fun and playing a bunch of different sports, they're 2 years old in their training age. So I forget. Actually, it might have been you that reposted this, I don't remember. I just saw this on Twitter the other day, but it was about like football and the start of like football season for high school or even younger, like middle school. And it was like talking about how like, you know, basically the point was like wherever your kid's playing at 10U or 12U doesn't matter for high school. It's not going to make a difference. And actually, I don't think it was you. I think I know who reposted this, but they reposted like exchange the word hockey for football. And I was thinking about it And it kind of gets the same thing I'm now on a rant about is like you don't need to worry about if you want to play Division 1 college hockey or you want to play in the OHL. Like, I mean, yeah, certain leagues or levels are going to help you get there better than others. But if you're 12 years old and you're that good, you're going to grow and progress and get to that point regardless. And if you're not, you're not, even if you're playing at the highest level. So I think we spend a lot of time trying to make sure that we're positioning ourselves best for this end goal, whatever it may be. And at the end of the day, like there's kids that play OHL Division 1 that were playing freaking JV high school hockey or really low level varsity hockey when they were 15, 16 years old and still get there because they're that good and they are meant to be at that level. And there's others that played that high level, whatever it is, their whole lives, and they don't get there because they weren't meant to be at that level. They weren't going to achieve that. So I think not to get all philosophical, but like what's meant to be will happen. And like the stress of should my kid or should I, if you're a player, should I play U16 AAA or should I do a high school or prep school? It's like it matters, sure, but it doesn't matter as much as everyone might tell you it does when you're going through it.
Yeah, I think it's really easy to say this at like 10U, 12U, and you're gonna think that I'm only talking to that age group, but I'm literally talking all the way up, and we've just come full circle. And this is why it applies to a mid 20 something to a Tung Vilo. I think I got that right. I was trying to just keep it first name. But anyway,
Stay away from the last name. It's tough.
yeah, stay away from that thing. But like go to where the love is. And the person that you're talking about, the JV high school, to just like talk about an absolute freak now. If you've seen photos of Jackson Blake, but like um again, the Chicago Steel um took a kid from Eden Prairie JV, not varsity. He's playing JV hockey, but like if you have that right blend of like a late bloomer, not gonna physically develop until he hasn't physically developed until I think what he's a junior at North Dakota now, and now he's like a monster. But like before that, just like this pencil thin kid, couldn't gain weight, been there. I was that kid. But um like the right combination of like if you're not writing, here's the only issue, and here's why parents, I think, feed into like the fear of playing 16U AAA because they feel like they have to. But it's like if you're going where the love is, you can play 16U AAA and be the 13th forward and get on the team and get to the level. But like, is that where the love is? Are you gonna play as the 13th forward? The answer is probably not. Do you have a coach that's first year Tua or Mike McDaniel Tua? Probably first year Tua. So like you're not gonna get unlocked based on his belief. So like you're going to be on the team, but you're not going to have a role that's going to allow you to get on the ice and develop. You have to play. Player development involves playing. There's play in the word. So like get on the ice, please. But anyway, um, if you go to where the love is at 10U and it's fun and it doesn't look like professional hockey at 10U, which is the professionalism's coming sooner and sooner. And the professionalism at a young age is just, I give the analogy of lighter fluid. And if you put lighter fluid on a fire, it's going to burn really hot for a while. And then if you don't have any more sticks, it's going to burn out. So like we have a burnout issue because we're professionalizing too soon. And then going to where the love is at 10U is just putting one by one small stick on the fire and building the biggest fire possible and having a supply of wood on the side. And the thing will just never burn out when you build the biggest fire and still have more fuel to put on it. So like I give that analogy to youth parents that are like, we should go play double A 10U because A is just there's one more A. And it's like, no, who's the coach that's gonna allow your kid to have more fun? And then do that again at 12U and do that again at 14U and probably do it again at 16U. And then at 18, like send them off to juniors. Hopefully you don't run into the get too serious force coach, but like you have to build the biggest fire. And what we're doing, at least in the West, is just like lighter fluid, and we're burnt out by 16, and kids are quitting. So that's like my synopsis of the current issue in youth sports. We can wrap on that if you want to, or if you
I'll
want to.
just I'll just add one thing because there could be people of those 17 loyal listeners that might be like, well, Drew, that's youth sports. And I'll just say in this, obviously, Division 3, I don't work at the Division 1 or pro hockey level, but the Division 3 level, we do get asked quite a bit, like coming out of prep school, coming out of U18, where should I play juniors? What league should I play in? What's the best? And probably to an annoying fault, because if I were a player asking that question, I'd likely want some tangible guidance of like, don't go to this league, go to that league. To an annoying fault, my response is always the same. Where's the best opportunity? Where are you going to develop the most? And so with your example, it's like you want that extra A as the 13th forward. So for a player it's coming into juniors, like, do you want that tier 2 league or that higher league, but being 13th forward, 7th D, maybe not even 13th forward, 10th forward? Or do you want some quote lower league, tons of opportunity? So prioritize the opportunity and prioritize your development. How much does that coach want you? How much is that coach going to develop you? Like, those are basically the two questions you ask. If he wants you a lot, there's probably going to be opportunity there. And if he's willing to develop you, or that's part of something that he cares about is making his players better while he has you on his team, you're going to know. He's going to tell you about that. He's going to talk about it. Former players will talk about it. Current players will talk about it. So it's like, it's not just youth hockey, extra A's, minus an A, whatever. Like maybe not everyone in college, but certainly for me, when I'm asked that question, I'm always like, the opportunity and the development is what matters most. It's not the league you're playing in. Like good players exist everywhere, literally everywhere, every league. And a really good player at a really high level, not getting any opportunity and not developing is not getting a great chance to showcase themselves to colleges. A really good player at a lower, again, lower in quotes, league with great opportunity and great development. Maybe some teams won't look at you because they think that that league is below them, but you're going to find a spot that's going to take you, and you're probably going to have a very good chance of being successful due to the opportunity and development that you got. So it ain't just a youth hockey thing. It exists, in my opinion, at every level, and it should. You should be prioritizing those opportunities to play and get better, and then the chance to develop and improve your game. It's going to matter more for you, certainly at a young age, and even when you get into, high school, juniors, college. To me, that's what matters most.
Yeah, to just make it full circle, like I'll post the clip of the Tua podcast, but just it's like the short clip is like 45 seconds long. Like it viscerally, as an adult, like you can tell it brings up some emotion in him. The difference between playing for a coach that was literally his rate limiter and a coach that completely unlocked him. So again, not a youth hockey thing, not even just a college hockey thing. It's literally through the ranks. Go to where the love is. I'll wrap on that. We'll see you next time.